This is Reality Dispatch, written by Jim Mintz.
It was 3 o'clock on a Friday, and raining heavily on the pavement outside the Strand mini shopping circuit in one of the parallel strips between George Street and Pitt Street Mall. Gary was 72 years old and had begun shining shoes on the shoe shine stall 4 years earlier to make extra income during the pandemic. He remembered his children laughing at the concept of his return to the workforce from retirement and refusing to accept his donations. This was until they were laid off from their employers and found it a necessary evil. Gary was proud to support them, even though his contributions could only stretch so far. 4 years on from the global shutdown, he continued his shifts diligently, 5 days a week. The Strand was happy to have him. The centre management had considered closing the novel post located between the elevators on the first floor many times since they acquired the site. However, there was a high propensity for professionals to seek Gary's services, as he was the only shoe shine available near the courts and the Parliament. Gary's clients included judges, barristers, politicians, and hotshot investors. If they wore black leather for a living, chances are Gary had run his cloth over their shoes. He watched as the water poured down on the entrance to the strip. He had 45 minutes remaining until he would be closing the stand down. He was not looking forward to his train commute in such a downpour. He sat on his client's stools and read the morning's paper, hoping his luck would change come 3:45. "Old man, you still open?" came a voice that startled Gary mid-paragraph. "Certainly, sir," he said as he stood. "Please have a seat." The young man did as instructed and removed his phone from his blazer pocket. Gary did not recognize him, not a regular. The man scrolled through his emails as Gary commandeered his ankles onto the pre-attached stirrups. "This is kangaroo leather, very tough, very good," he said to the man who wasn't listening. "I recommend the Stacks in Oxford black. It'll last longer, but it's a bit dearer. Is that okay?" he asked as the young man continued to scroll through his phone, oblivious to Gary's inquiries. "Excuse me, the Stacks in Oxford black is okay?" Gary asked again, holding up the tin of polish for the man to inspect. The young man was startled by the intrusion into his phone navigation and frowned. "What? The Stacks in Oxford? Do I look like I give a shit? Just shine the fucking shoes, old man." The man interrupted as he took out a white compartment from his right side blazer pocket and removed a set of headphones to place in each ear. "And do it fast too," he concluded as the last bud was placed in his remaining ear. Gary stood motionless with the tin resting on the edge of his fingertips. In 4 years and 3 months, he had never been spoken to in such a way whilst on the job. Always a healthy degree of respect and courtesy was afforded him by all of his clients. Gary's frozen joints and stiff knees began to ache on the spot. All of a sudden, the endless knee bends and arched back positions to gain the best polish on the Chelsea boots of the professionals who sat on his stools took their toll on his 72-year-old frame. He had never felt the pain of his work before. He had never felt his age before. He had never felt so ridiculed. Now he would have to serve someone who so despised him, and it made him feel old, alone, and pathetic. "What are you waiting for?" the man continued in a defined irritation that made Gary's joints move on instinct. Gary bent his knees and allowed the pain to shoot up his shins, setting his caps on fire with a ferocity that extended up his spine. He bit his tongue to stop himself from crying out. He felt a swell of lumps arranged near his eyes, and he didn't recognize the faintly familiar sensation at first until it was too late and the tears rolled down his cheeks. He bit his tongue harder to stop the already overtaken urge to weep, but it was no use. He was crying indignantly and he could not stop. Before him on the toe of the man's boot was an incision above the seam that would have been naked to the eye of someone who would pass him in the street. It would take a keen sense of focus to notice the crack. But Gary did. For any other customer, he would buff and polish and rebuff and blow dry and tap his secret ink splot brush on it to hide any defects. He was surgical in his approach. He began to provide the same treatment for the man, not as a favor but out of routine. He buffed and polished and prepared his micro paintbrush with just the right shade of charcoal black when something stopped him from continuing. He blinked and could feel the remnants of his tears that had long dried. Gary looked over the left shoe and realized he had polished the entire boot completely and utterly in intricate detail. He had no memory of doing so. He looked at the micro scuff on the toe. It too was almost gone thanks to his craftsmanship. "That's enough! Next shoe, old man!" the man yelled as he snatched away the boot and held up the other millimeters from Gary's nose. Gary widened his eyes to remove the crust caused by the dried tears and took a deep breath now that his nose was clear. He looked down at his toolkit. He noticed the penknife, sharpened on Thursday last week as he had particular difficulty removing a seam to be restitched by the cobbler. He picked it up. He thought about his son and daughter, grown, happy, dignified, proud parents. They didn't need his contributions any longer. He thought about Daisy and how he missed her. How every day he came home thinking she would be there and the sting in his chest when he remembered she was not. He thought about the pain in his knees and how he would no longer have to put his body under the pressure that this man was putting him under right now. He thought about his 72 years, no controversies, no grievances, no fights, no serious incidents. He thought about how his actions would be perceived, how out of the ordinary they would be thought of. It was very out of character. He is such a nice old man. He would never hurt anyone and has a very good reputation in the community, he imagined his lawyer telling the judge. Gary thought about all the judges who had sat in his stool and had told him that 90% of all criminals, if they just plead guilty in the first instance, are left off with a good behavior warning. Old man, hurry the fuck up. Gary picked up the penknife, drew back his arm just far enough, and rammed it into the hard kangaroo leather of the young man's right boot. He aimed directly above the seam line so as to make sure the blade pierced through the natural fabric and into the flesh of his foot.
For more stories of fact-based fiction, head to jimmins.substack.com.